At 2:20 a.m., the doorbell rang. A man called out, "Babe, you left your purse in my car." My fiancé's face drained. It was 2:20 in the morning when the doorbell rang. At first, I thought I was dreaming. The chime was faint in the distance, cutting through that hazy stage where sleep still had its grip on me. Then it rang again, louder, sharper. I sat up, confused, and glanced at the clock on my nightstand. The glowing red numbers confirmed it. No one respectable rings a doorbell at that hour unless something is wrong. I swung my legs out of bed, still groggy. That was when I noticed Arya sitting upright, stiff as stone. Her phone was clutched in her hands, and her face was pale. Not sleepy pale, not startled pale. It was the kind of color you see on someone who just heard a judge deliver their sentence. Before I could even form a question, the voice came from outside. A man's voice. Clear, confident, casual. "Babe, you left your purse in my car." The words slid through the quiet hallway like a blade. My chest tightened as if all the air had been sucked out of the house. I looked at Arya, waiting for her to laugh it off or shake her head in disbelief. She didn't. Instead, her lips parted, her breath caught, and she went even whiter. Her hands trembled so hard the phone slipped from her grasp and clattered against the hardwood floor. That reaction told me everything. I walked toward the door slowly, my heart thudding in my throat. When I opened it, the scene burned into me instantly. A man stood on the porch, tall, athletic build, wearing a hoodie like he was dropping by after the gym. He was holding her purse casually, swinging it by the strap like he was returning something she had left behind in his car after a date. The porch light revealed a faint smirk on his face. He glanced at me, then over my shoulder as if expecting her to appear behind me. He didn't look embarrassed. He didn't look confused. He looked familiar, comfortable, like this wasn't his first time standing at my door. I didn't speak. I didn't ask questions. I just looked at him, memorizing every feature of his face, locking it into my mind like evidence at a crime scene. His casual smirk faltered under my silence. He mumbled something about having to get going, set the purse on the porch railing, and walked back down the path toward a dark sedan parked half a block away. I shut the door without a word and turned. Arya hadn't moved. She was frozen near the hallway, her eyes locked on the purse like it was radioactive. For a long moment, we just stood there. The house was silent except for the faint hum of the fridge in the kitchen. I expected her to break, to try to explain, to fumble for excuses. Nothing came. She stayed rooted in place, eyes wide, lips tight. And in that silence, a decision formed in me. If I demanded answers now, she would lie. If I pressed her, she would cry, twist the story, claim it was a misunderstanding. But her face when that man called her babe had already answered every question. So I walked past her, picked up the purse from the railing, and placed it on the coffee table. She watched me like she was waiting for me to explode, but I didn't. I simply turned off the porch light, locked the door, and went back to bed without a word. I lay awake until dawn, my eyes fixed on the ceiling. Every creak of the house, every shift of the air felt different now. I was no longer living with the woman I thought I knew. I was living with a stranger who had managed to build a double life under my nose. But she didn't know what I was planning. The next morning, the air in the house was thick with unspoken tension. She moved around carefully, like someone tiptoeing across thin ice. I played along, sipping my coffee, scrolling on my phone, pretending the night before hadn't happened. She kept glancing at me, her lips parting slightly like she was about to say something, but then she swallowed it back down. By the time she left for work, I had already decided I wasn't going to confront her directly. That would give her control of the story. Instead, I was going to dig until I had every answer she thought she had hidden. As soon as her car pulled out of the driveway, I opened the purse. Inside, her wallet sat on top, neat and organized. But tucked in one of the smaller compartments, I found 2 crumpled receipts. One was from a bar downtown, time-stamped at midnight, on a night she had told me she was staying late at work. The second was from a late-night diner on the outskirts of town, dated just last week. Both had 2 entrees and 2 drinks. The deeper I went, the worse it got. At the very bottom of the purse, wedged between a forgotten lipstick and an old movie stub, was a hotel room keycard. Plain white, with the logo of a chain motel 15 miles away. I sat back in the chair, my pulse heavy in my ears. This wasn't a one-off mistake. This was a routine. That night replayed in my head again. The smirk on the man's face, the way she froze, the way she said nothing. Everything fit too neatly. She wasn't caught off guard because some stranger showed up at our door. She was caught off guard because the mask had slipped, and she hadn't had time to put it back on. I spent the rest of the morning checking her old tablet, one she had stopped using months ago. She never bothered disconnecting her accounts. Her messages synced automatically. And there it was. Threads of conversations, some deleted but recoverable. Enough to show patterns. Nicknames. Inside jokes. Plans for meetups. Not just one man, multiple names. But one appeared more often than the rest, Damien. I dug deeper, cross-referencing timestamps with her supposed work hours. The overlap was sickening. While I thought she was putting in extra time at the office, she was at bars, motels, or riding in his car. The first wave of anger hit me then. Not because she cheated, that part was almost predictable in hindsight, but because she had crafted such an elaborate lie, down to fake traffic delays and work emergencies. She had used my trust as cover for someone else's attention. But instead of rage, what came next was calculation. I realized she had underestimated me. She thought I would either never find out, or, if I did, I would confront her in a storm of shouting and tears. She expected chaos. She expected me to act on emotion. That's how she would control the situation. But she didn't know I was already slipping into detective mode. The rest of that day, I watched her closely, noting every shift in her tone, every excuse she rehearsed in her head. When she came home, she tried to act normal. She cooked dinner, asked about my day, smiled too wide at things that weren't funny. I nodded, answered calmly, kept my voice steady. Inside, I was collecting evidence. The purse, the receipts, the hotel key, the synced messages. Each one was a thread, and I was pulling all of them together, weaving a net she wouldn't escape. That night, when she fell asleep beside me, I stayed awake again. I listened to her breathing, even, steady, unaware. My eyes stayed open in the dark, and I thought about the man on the porch. The way he said, "Babe," without hesitation, the way he carried himself like he had no reason to hide. That wasn't a fling. That was someone who believed he had a claim. And if he thought that, it meant this betrayal ran deeper than I had even uncovered yet. By dawn, one thing was certain. The night at 2:20 a.m. wasn't just a slip. It was the start of unraveling everything she had built. And I was going to let it unravel piece by piece, until there was nothing left of the life she thought she controlled. The morning after the doorbell incident, I sat in my car outside her office parking lot, watching. I told Aria I had errands downtown, but truthfully, I needed to see if her schedule matched reality. She had claimed she was swamped at work, projects piling up, deadlines breathing down her neck. If that were true, she'd head straight inside, maybe grab a coffee on the way. Instead, I watched her park, fix her makeup in the mirror, and then sit there. Minutes passed. She wasn't rushing. She wasn't stressed. She was smiling faintly at her phone. Then she got out, not with her laptop bag, not even with her usual work tote, but with the same purse that had been left in Damien's car. The sight of it made my jaw tighten. She walked not toward the office entrance but across the street, slipping into a small cafe. 10 minutes later, the man himself, Damien, walked in. They didn't hug, didn't kiss, not publicly. But the ease of it all was what struck me. They sat in a corner booth, heads close together, speaking low, laughing quietly. The way their shoulders tilted toward each other told me everything I needed. This wasn't lust. It wasn't some cheap thrill. This was familiarity. I snapped a few pictures through my windshield. Nothing dramatic, but enough to prove she wasn't where she said she would be. I left before she saw me. That evening, Aria came home buzzing with stress. She complained about her boss, about late meetings, about how drained she felt. I nodded, setting my phone face down, the images safe in my gallery. She asked what I had done all day, and I gave her a simple answer. Ran errands, paid bills. She smiled in relief, probably thinking her act was airtight. But in my pocket, I had the beginning of a file. And that file was going to grow. Over the next few days, I became deliberate. I played the part of the trusting fiancé while piecing together her movements. Whenever she said she was working late, I checked her location history. One night, instead of her office, the pin showed a motel off the highway. Another night, it was a residential street in the South End, nowhere near her company. I printed screenshots and slid them into an envelope I kept hidden in the attic. The purse receipts I had found earlier were just the start. I started digging through the recycling bin outside. Most people throw out receipts absent-mindedly, but patterns emerge if you look. Gas stations near his neighborhood. Restaurants on nights she swore she had dinner with coworkers. Even ATM withdrawals in amounts too neat to be random. 50 here, 100 there, like she was splitting bills in cash. Piece by piece, the double life took shape. The tablet gave me even more. At first, the synced text looked like fragments, incomplete because she must have deleted some threads on her main phone. But the cloud keeps ghosts. Old conversations lingered. There were messages about can't wait to get away, about covering the story, about how she would explain things soon. My stomach twisted when I read her words about me. She described me as stable, dependable, boring. The very qualities she had once praised me for were now weapons against me in her secret conversations. Damien responded with the arrogance of someone who believed he had already won. He wrote things like how she deserved more, how she should stop pretending, how he couldn't wait for her to finally cut ties. It was all there in black and white. The most disturbing part came one night when I scrolled back months further. That was when another name appeared, Lucas. At first, I thought it was just another fling. But the tone was different. Protective. Involved. And then I realized. Lucas wasn't another lover. He was her stepbrother. The messages revealed a strange dynamic. She confided in him, shared details of her relationship struggles, and he encouraged her to keep things quiet until she figured out what she wanted. He wasn't stopping her. He was helping her manage the lie. It made my skin crawl. I started following Damien too. Not stalking, not in the cinematic sense, just noting patterns. His car, the dark sedan, was easy to identify. He worked at a gym across town, and his schedule rotated. I learned when he was likely to finish, when he was likely to meet her. One night, I trailed him from a distance. He drove straight from the gym to a small strip of bars near the riverfront. 10 minutes later, Aria's car pulled up. They got out, walking side by side, close but never touching until they disappeared inside. I didn't go in. I just waited. When they came back out, hours later, Damien had his arm draped casually around her shoulders. She wasn't pushing him away. She wasn't nervous. She was comfortable. I took more photos. My evidence pile was growing heavy. By this point, I had enough to end things outright. But that wasn't enough for me anymore. Ending it would give her a clean escape, maybe even pity from friends who never saw the truth. I wanted clarity. I wanted every hidden corner exposed. So I set a trap. On a Thursday morning, I told Aria I had to travel for a work conference out of town. I even packed a bag, kissed her on the cheek, and drove off. But instead of heading to the airport, I circled back and parked on a quiet street 2 blocks away. Hours passed. At first, nothing happened. She stayed home, probably working remotely. By early evening, though, I saw Damien's sedan roll up the street. He parked casually, walked up the steps, and she greeted him at the door. From where I sat, I couldn't hear the words, but the body language was undeniable. The way she tilted her head, the way he brushed his hand against her back as they went inside. My chest burned with fury, but I forced myself to stay put. Bursting in would have been satisfying, but fleeting. Instead, I walked quietly to my neighbor's property. The old couple 2 houses down were on vacation, and their blinds had been left half drawn. From their second-story window, I had a clear line of sight into my living room. And there it was, my fiancée and her lover, laughing on my couch. Damien tossed his jacket over the armrest like he belonged there. She poured him wine, the good kind I had bought for our anniversary. They toasted like it was some celebration. I lifted my phone and recorded. The grainy footage didn't need sound. The intimacy was visible in every gesture. Hours later, they left together. I trailed them at a safe distance. Instead of heading to his apartment or some anonymous motel, they drove across town and stopped at a diner. And waiting inside, sitting in a booth by himself, was Lucas. When Aria and Damien walked in, Lucas stood to greet them. He hugged his stepsister, shook Damien's hand. They sat together like this was routine. My stomach turned. Her stepbrother wasn't just covering for her. He was actively endorsing the entire relationship. I snapped more photos through the window. The 3 of them sat for nearly an hour, talking, laughing, sharing food. When they finally left, I didn't follow. I already had enough to know the scope of what I was up against. That night, back at home, I couldn't even bring myself to lie in the same bed. I sat in the living room instead, the footage playing on a loop on my phone. My fiancée, cozy with her lover. Her stepbrother smiling like it was all perfectly normal. Every piece of the puzzle was aligning. She wasn't just betraying me. She was building an alternate life, brick by brick, supported by people who should have been warning me. And the worst part? I was still letting her believe I was clueless. She was sleeping upstairs, wrapped in the illusion of control. She thought she had outsmarted me, but she hadn't realized she had already handed me everything I needed. By the time the sun came up, my plan was no longer about catching her. It was about dismantling her world completely, piece by piece, until she was left with nothing. And Lucas? He was going to fall with her. By the time Friday rolled around, I had stopped thinking like a fiancé and started thinking like an investigator. Every move I made was deliberate. Aria thought she was in control, but in reality, she was walking into a snare I had already begun weaving. I knew confrontation in the heat of the moment would be useless. If I burst into the living room that night when Damien was sipping my wine, she would have cried, denied, spun half-truths, and then painted me as unstable. That's the oldest trick in the book. But with Lucas tied into this, I needed more than outrage. I needed undeniable evidence that no one could explain away. So I decided to build my own case file. Not for the police, not for lawyers, at least not yet. This was for me. This was the shield against manipulation and the sword to cut through her lies. Saturday morning, Aria mentioned she had errands to run, her favorite excuse lately. I told her I had to attend a networking lunch. In truth, I drove 2 towns over to meet a private investigator. The PI was an older guy named Harold, the type who looked like he lived on coffee and nicotine. He didn't blink when I laid it out. A fiancé, another man, a suspicious stepbrother. I handed him the receipts, the photos, the motel key, even the cloud-synced messages I had printed. His eyes scanned each one methodically, and then he asked only 2 questions. Do you want confirmation or destruction? The choice hung in the air. I answered carefully, both. Over the next week, Harold shadowed them. He wasn't sloppy like I was, snapping pictures through windshields. He knew how to blend in. He captured Aria and Damien holding hands at a movie theater. He tailed them into a hotel lobby where they booked a room together under his name. He even managed to record Lucas meeting them again at a cafe, sitting comfortably as they whispered about timing and when she'll finally make the switch. The switch. That word stayed in my head. They weren't just sneaking around. They were preparing. I began to realize that Aria wasn't planning to juggle both lives forever. She was plotting her exit, one that left me blindsided while she landed softly in Damien's arms. And if Lucas was involved, it meant her family might already be half convinced of some twisted story that made me the villain. The night I decided to act came quicker than expected. It was a Thursday again. Aria claimed she was stuck late at the office, client emergency. I watched her location ping on my screen, not her office, but Damien's apartment building. I didn't follow this time. I let Harold handle it. Hours later, he texted me a photo that nearly made my chest cave in. It was Aria, curled on Damien's couch, wearing one of his hoodies, a wine glass in her hand, her bare feet propped on his lap while they watched TV. That wasn't a fling. That wasn't a guilty secret. That was a woman rehearsing her new life. The next day, I didn't rage. I didn't shout. I cooked her breakfast, kissed her cheek, and went to work as if nothing had shifted. But inside, something had crystallized. I was done playing detective in the shadows. It was time to bring the truth into the light. I set the stage carefully. Her parents had invited us to a family dinner that weekend. They thought it was just to go over some wedding details. I told them I'd be there and asked if Lucas would be attending too. Her mother said yes. Of course, he never missed family dinners. Perfect. Meanwhile, Harold prepped a neat folder of evidence for me. Photos, receipts, timestamps, even written statements. A dossier so clean that no denial could smear it. The night of the dinner, I felt eerily calm. Aria spent hours curling her hair, choosing a dress, rehearsing her polite smile in the mirror. I buttoned my shirt, slipped the folder into my jacket, and said nothing. Her family's dining room was warm, filled with the smells of roasted chicken and wine. Her parents greeted me with their usual formality, her stepmother asking about work, her father nodding at my answers. Lucas arrived late, sliding into his chair with that casual grin that made my skin crawl. We ate, we drank, and I waited. Halfway through dessert, I stood up. Everyone looked at me, surprised. Aria's smile faltered, sensing something. I placed the folder on the table and slid it toward her father. At first, no one moved. Then her father opened it, flipped through the photos, and went pale. Her mother leaned over his shoulder, gasping softly. Aria's face drained of color, the same way it had the night Damien called her babe. Lucas shifted uncomfortably, trying to play it off, but I spoke clearly, calmly, cutting through the silence. This is who she's been with. This is where your son has been covering for her. Gasps. Stares. The room shifted like the ground had been pulled out from under it. Her father slammed the folder shut, his jaw clenched tight. Her mother looked between me and Aria, horrified. Lucas tried to interject, but her father snapped at him to be silent. Aria stammered, tried to weave excuses, but her words stumbled over each other. The weight of the evidence crushed every lie before it left her lips. What followed was chaos. Her father demanded answers. Her mother burst into tears. Lucas tried to defend her, claiming I was being controlling, manipulative, setting her up. But when I pulled out Harold's final piece, a video of Aria entering the motel with Damien, Lucas fell silent. The table that once held roasted chicken and wine glasses was now littered with proof of betrayal. And in that moment, I didn't feel vindicated. I felt strangely detached, like I was watching a stage play I already knew the ending to. The fallout was instant. Her father told her to leave. Her mother said she couldn't believe what she had raised. Lucas tried to storm out, muttering about family loyalty, but her father stopped him at the door, telling him he was no longer welcome. Aria begged me to talk privately. I refused. She tried to follow me out to the car, but her own parents blocked her, telling her she had shamed them enough. I drove home in silence, my chest hollow but steady. At midnight, Harold called. He had one final piece of news. Damien, her lover, the man who smirked on my porch at 2:20 a.m., was married. His wife was 6 months pregnant. Aria hadn't just betrayed me. She had thrown her entire life into a man who was lying to her just as much as she lied to me. After the family dinner, the silence in the car ride home was heavier than anything I had ever felt. I wasn't driving with Arya. She was still at her parents' house, cornered by her father's fury and her mother's tears. I drove alone, the folder of evidence now sitting on my passenger seat. It felt like a closing argument, a final word no one could refute. By the next morning, word had already spread. Families like hers don't keep secrets well. The calls began before I had even finished my coffee. Her cousin texted me, apologizing for not saying anything. An old friend of hers messaged me on social media, admitting that they had always suspected something but didn't want to get involved. The betrayal wasn't just Arya's. It was a network of silence, people who saw red flags but chose convenience over truth. Arya came home around noon that day. She looked wrecked, her eyes swollen, makeup smeared, hair in disarray. For the first time in years, she didn't walk in like she owned the space. She looked like an intruder, hesitant, shrinking. She tried to talk, her voice cracking, pleading that things weren't what they seemed. But the evidence was too heavy. She stumbled through half-formed excuses, then broke into begging. She said she could change, that it had been a mistake, that Damien wasn't important. That last part almost made me laugh. I reminded her of the video, her curled on his couch, wearing his hoodie like it was her second skin. I reminded her of the diner meeting with Lucas, where they planned her switch. Her denials evaporated in the air between us. She dropped to her knees on the living room carpet, sobbing into her hands. But her tears no longer moved me. They weren't grief for me. They were grief for herself, for the loss of control she once thought she had. I told her calmly, we were finished, and I meant it in every sense. That evening, I started the logistics. Our engagement was over. The deposits we had placed on the venue, the catering, the photographer, I canceled them one by one. The penalties stung, but the satisfaction of watching her dream wedding dissolve in real time made it easier. I called her father and told him I would not be moving forward with the marriage. He didn't argue. He thanked me for bringing the truth to light. I could hear the strain in his voice, the humiliation of realizing his daughter and his stepson had been conspiring under his roof. Her mother sent me a message later that night, apologizing, saying she felt ashamed, admitting she hadn't believed Lucas was capable of something like this. She begged me not to think less of the entire family. I responded with civility, but no warmth. This wasn't about them anymore. As for Lucas, the fallout was swift. Her father cut him off financially, removed him from the family business, and told him never to set foot in their house again. The last I heard, Lucas moved into a friend's spare room and started bouncing between odd jobs. His reputation tanked. The smug grin he once carried evaporated when people realized he had played accomplice in his stepsister's betrayal. He had wanted to protect her secret, to shield her deception. Instead, he had destroyed his own standing in the family. But the biggest blow came from Damien's side. 2 days after the dinner, Harold called me again, chuckling dryly. Damien's wife had found out. She had received anonymous mail, copies of the same photos and videos Harold had compiled for me. I didn't ask how she got them. Harold only said that loose ends have a way of tying themselves when people need to know the truth. Damien's wife, heavily pregnant, kicked him out of their house that very night. Word spread through his gym, through his clients, through his social circle. The man who swaggered onto my porch at 2:20 a.m., calling my fiancée babe, was suddenly a pariah. I never even had to lift a finger for that part. Karma handled him. As for Arya, her life collapsed piece by piece. Her family stopped speaking to her except for her mother, who couldn't fully cut ties. Her friends, once quick to laugh with her, went silent. No one wanted to be associated with the woman whose double life had imploded so publicly. She lost her job a month later, not because of me, but because word leaked into her workplace. Someone mentioned her reputation, and in an office that thrived on appearances, she was quietly let go. I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. Watching her unravel without my hand guiding it was enough. I moved out of our shared home within 2 weeks, packed my belongings, canceled the joint accounts, severed every tie. I left her with nothing but her own reflection. She tried contacting me. Calls, emails, handwritten letters slipped into my mailbox, each one more desperate than the last. She shifted from anger to begging, from promises to threats, and finally to silence when she realized none of it mattered anymore. The last message I ever received from her was a single line. You'll regret this when you're alone. But she was wrong. Months later, I looked back at that night at 2:20 a.m. The sound of the doorbell, the casual voice calling her babe, the purse swinging in Damien's hand. It could have been a breaking point, the moment where everything shattered in chaos. Instead, it became the spark that lit a fire I controlled from start to finish. By staying calm, by thinking like a detective, by refusing to let her lies control the narrative, I walked away not as a victim, but as someone who refused to be played. The true consequence wasn't her tears, or Lucas losing his place in the family, or Damien being cast out of his marriage. It was the permanence of what she lost. She didn't just lose me. She lost the life she had been building on deceit. She lost the safety net of family, the respect of friends, the illusion of control. And me? I gained clarity. I learned that betrayal doesn't have to be met with rage. Sometimes the most brutal revenge is letting people destroy themselves under the weight of their own choices, while you walk away untouched. When I think back to that night, I don't remember the chill in my chest or the silence in the hallway. I remember her face, the way it drained of color when she realized the man outside wasn't going to vanish, and neither was the truth. That was the beginning of her end, and the beginning of my freedom. And that's the story. If you're still here, that means you're one of us. So go ahead, hit that subscribe button. I drop new chaos every single day, and trust me, tomorrow's story, it's even worse than this one.
Into me, and bear in mind, early on, I was living in California for about 10 years, and people, hey man, I made my own kombucha. Do you want to try it? I'd never tried kombucha. And they put fruit in it, and the fruit had fermented, even just the tiniest amount. Some kombuchas I can't do because there's an tiniest amount of fermentation. That's enough to set it off. But what happens in me is that it changes how much I think is a good idea to drink, and it changes my sense of right and wrong. And my personal values just completely alter.